The rise of domestic violent extremism is a serious and growing national security threat. The Biden administration will confront this threat with the necessary resources and resolve.
Randy Blazak is chairman of the Oregon Coalition Against Hate Crime, and he joins me from Portland, Oregon. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to start with the federal government's new emphasis on fighting domestic extremism. Yesterday, you wrote that 2021 will see a post-Q anti-government movement that, with the help of social media, will fuse all the bad actors of the past. I mean, that sounds ominous to say the least. So to tackle that, what should President Biden's first concrete priorities be?
Well, we do have this looming threat. I mean, I think some people thought it was going to disappear after Inauguration Day, but there has been a growing anti-government movement out there that was probably most famously expressed in the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, and it's only grown since then. It's grown online. It's grown in the sort of vacuum of social media and the conspiracy theories. And so what the Biden administration really needs to do is sort of tackle four main areas that you got to get down on the threats that are looming, that are out there being planned, that include domestic terrorism and acts to kind of create this momentum around a civil war. You've got to work on the infiltration of white supremacists in the military and in law enforcement, which is a big issue. You've got to work on the root causes that drive people into these movements, which was a sort of fringe subculture in the 1990s and now has become kind of a mainstream movement in the 2020s. And then also we just need sort of a leadership about what kind of country we want to be going future, how we're going to tackle issues like race and the demographic changes that are coming.
That is a long laundry list there. We're seeing on the right of our screen pictures of the attack on the Capitol. Just going back to that, I mean, the FBI and the Justice Department, they're considering not charging all of those who stormed the Capitol. Does that make sense to you, to focus more just on the most violent offenders, or does that send a bad message that committing this kind of crime, well, it's okay as long as you don't go overboard?
Well, we see a similar tactic on the left where the real agitators are the ones that get the attention, and the people who just get caught up in the moment are really less culpable. And so I think what we're going to be seeing is a strategy to really break up some of these organizations that were behind the Capitol coup attempt, that were sort of bringing people to Washington, D.C., and the people that were just there that got caught up in the moment are less important to sort of stopping this momentum than just sort of going after the main actors.
You mentioned the left there. So with the focus on the attack on the Capitol, we haven't really been paying attention to what's been going on. The protests in Portland, where you are this week, they really ramped up. We saw rioters vandalize the state Democratic Party headquarters and a federal immigration building. You know, you might think that with Donald Trump out of the White House, the temperature would have cooled, but obviously that's not the case. Why is this happening now?
Yeah, these issues don't go away just because we have a change of administration. The systemic racism in policing is something that goes on whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House. So there's still a need, I think, from these protesters to keep the fire burning on these issues, to not let the momentum that was created in the summer of 2020 die just because we have a new president. But then, you know, these are sort of apples and oranges, these two different wings that we have of protests. One are trying to expand democracy. The other are trying to stop democracy and stop elections from being counted. One side is about trying to get civil rights to as many millions of Americans as possible, and the other side is really about the rights of one individual to be president as long as he wants to be. So we get into a sort of false equivalency when we compare them, but there is kind of a overlap in how they impact the public discourse around protests, including bringing people in and pushing a lot of people away.
So I asked you this, a couple of months ago when this was really in the forefront. Do you feel that anything is actually being achieved with this, other than fueling the right wing? I mean, you mentioned that false equivalency. We hear that all the time. I mean, look at Fox News website right now. They have 3 stories on what's going on in Portland and so on. So they're using it as ammunition. But is it actually achieving its ends, these sorts of protests?
Well, we've moved the discussion to the public forums about institutional racism. We're talking about things like defunding police departments and what that actually looks like. We're talking about the issues of implicit bias and police profiling. And so there are systemic changes that are happening. And I think what's happening now, especially with the change of the administration, is a lot of those conversations that were happening in the streets of America, including here in Portland, are moving inside to the halls of justice, to office buildings, to places where these real changes can be made. So we are seeing real change, and the main change is in how we're talking about these issues.
Yeah, I think the problem is when it descends into violence, that conversation stops and people just talk about what the pictures that they're seeing on their screens. We'll have to leave it there, but certainly plenty of issues to talk about with you in the future. Thank you so much for coming back on, Randy Blazak. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Biden has made COVID vaccinations a top priority, but states are still seeing problems with the vaccine rollout. Coming up, why they say supply can't